I hope it is better now. Okay.
Yeah, it's surely better.
Okay. So over the next 20 minutes, this is what I'm going to talk about: antiviral agents, monoclonal antibodies, and other therapies. And this is what my outline is going to be. Apart from the different antivirals, I'm going to also talk about the different monoclonal antibodies and how they feature in this particular wave. I will touch upon anti-inflammatory agents, mainly inhaled budesonide, some words about fluoxamine, how convalescent plasma, the modality, how does it fare in the present scenario, and finally, I'm going to sum it up in the form of what works and what does not. Right. So this is a busy slide, but I think this is an algorithm which we all know. This is the MOHFW algorithm on COVID-19 management. And I think you're all aware of the classification of COVID-19 patient, mild, moderate, and severe. I'm not going to go into that, but I think I would like to draw your attention to the fact that most of the managements which have been labeled here, they actually belong to one or more of the following class of drugs: antivirals, anti-inflammatory, monoclonal antibodies, anticoagulation, and supplements. So barring anticoagulation, my little talk is going to deal with most of them, if not in totality, but it's going to cover at least a significant part of them. Now, coming on to antiviral first. Now, antivirals, they have been with us from the inception of the pandemic. So we have a long list of antivirals: ivermectin, hydroxychloroquine, favipiravir, plasma, lopinavir, ritonavir, remdesivir. So they have been with us since almost the first wave. Now, the newer entrants have been these two, molnupiravir and paxlovid, and there's a lot of hype regarding this. So talking about the antivirals which we have already used: hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, favipiravir. Okay. So is my voice clearly audible, sir? Dr. Anjan Frika, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
It's perfectly fine.
Okay, fine. So regarding the antivirals which have been used in the previous waves, I have devoted only one slide to this because be it hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, or favipiravir, it has become evident with the accrual of evidence that all these three agents have minimal benefit, if any benefit that is. So all of them have kind of found their way out of most of the guidelines around the world. So hydroxychloroquine, ivermectin, favipiravir is not to be used as far as antivirals for COVID-19 is concerned. Coming to the next antiviral, remdesivir, something which we all know. Remdesivir has been equivalent to antiviral treatment in COVID-19. So I'll talk a little bit in detail about this. This remdesivir acts through inhibition of RNA-dependent polymerase of SARS-CoV-2. Traditionally, remdesivir has been thought to act in patients of moderate and severe COVID-19. But severe COVID-19, those who are not critically ill. So any patient, adult and pediatric, more than 12 years of age, and weighing at least 40 kilograms, who are on supplemental oxygen, but not on HFNC or mechanical ventilation, remdesivir is indicated for them, if not for mortality benefit, but for at least reducing the duration of hospitalization and the duration of illness. The traditional dose has been 200 milligram first day, followed by 100 milligram for 4 more days. And it can be extended in some extraordinary circumstances like no substantial improvement or the patient is on mechanical ventilation or ECMO. Now, I would like to draw your attention to this new evidence which has come in favor of remdesivir. This is regarding the Pine Tree trial, which came up in the later part of the last year in NEJM. So here, they have focused on the role of remdesivir in patients having mild COVID-19 who are at risk of progression. So by high risk of progression, I'm going to talk about them. So different factors like obesity, diabetes, hypertension, coronary artery disease. So these patients, when they were non-hospitalized and when they were symptomatic, when they were given remdesivir for 3 days, that led to reduced hospitalization or death in the remdesivir arm as compared to the placebo arm. But the issue with this trial was that it was only a single trial in a population which was predominantly unvaccinated, and its use, even in USA, in outpatients have been termed as tricky. Why? Because we know that remdesivir has got a number of adverse effects. It can produce hypersensitivity. In fact, there's a contraindication to the use of remdesivir. It can cause side effects like bradycardia, hypotension, something which we have faced clinically. Increased transaminases, they are also common, as is skin rash, nausea. It is also to be used cautiously in patients with low GFR, as well as patients who have high transaminases. There are also some important drug interactions regarding remdesivir, which has to be kept in mind. Pregnancy and breastfeeding, they are also not routine candidates for using remdesivir. And also the dosing needs to be altered in patients having either hepatic impairment or renal impairment, eGFR less than 30, or ALT/AST more than 5 to 10 times, or ALT elevation with signs, symptoms, or liver inflammation. There are actually indications for discontinuing therapy. So remdesivir, as far as FIND-3 trial is concerned, this trial shows some benefit in mild patients with risk factors for progression. But again, the use of remdesivir on an outpatient basis can be very tricky, and it cannot be translated directly to our country, where it can be used in an outpatient basis. Coming to the next antiviral, which is the molnupiravir. Now, there's a lot of hype again about molnupiravir, so let's see what it is. So this is a nucleoside analog. This basically acts by incorporating into the viral genome, resulting in errors in the viral replication. So that is how it acts. The indications are again from the MOVe-OUT trial, which talked about its use in mild patients with high risk of progression. So high risk of progression again means elderly, patients with cancer, chronic kidney disease, diabetes, so on and so forth. The dosing has been 800 milligrams twice a day for 5 days, started within 5 days of symptom onset. And no dose adjustment is as such required in renal or hepatic impairment. But what is important is that it cannot be used in patients less than 18 years of age because of potential bone and cartilage toxicity. Now, this toxicity is not the only potential side effect of molnupiravir. It is also potentially mutagenic with likely effect on human gonads and other mammalian cells. So much so that any female who has childbearing potential, who is using molnupiravir, has to use contraception for at least 4 days after the last dose of therapy. And males with partners who have childbearing potential, they have to use effective contraception for 3 months after the last dose. And it is as such not indicated in pregnant or breastfeeding conditions. So a closer look at the MOVe-OUT trial. We can see the Kaplan-Meier curve separating, showing a benefit in favor of hospitalization or death in favor of molnupiravir. So 6.8 versus 9.7% in the two arms. But what is important was that the benefits were not spread across the different subgroups. In fact, some subgroups, like those with lower viral load, diabetes, previous infection, there the placebo seem to be acting better than molnupiravir. So a lot of questions remain which have to be addressed before we can use molnupiravir indiscriminately. In the current scenario where the Omicron variant is leading to relatively milder cases with less hospitalization and death, it also seems logical that the absolute risk reduction in the form of numbers, they are going to be very small for patients treated with molnupiravir. And you add to it that the mutagenic potential, be it for mammalian cells, be it for the virus undergoing mutation. So it can be said that molnupiravir is probably not the game changer or the magic bullet which we are looking for. What appears to be more efficacious is Paxlovid. Again, it's a combination of two drugs, nirmatrelvir, ritonavir. Nirmatrelvir is a protease inhibitor. Ritonavir, from our HIV days, it inhibits CYP3A metabolism and the metabolism of nirmatrelvir. The dosing is twice a day for 5 days, and it has to be initiated within 5 days of symptom onset. Again, it has got some dose adjustment, both in renal impairment and hepatic impairment. Less than 30 GFR cannot be recommended. CTP score C, it cannot be recommended. It has got some side effects, liver injuries, hypertension, diarrhea, dysgeusia, nausea, in skin rashes. What is also important for Paxlovid is its potential for causing significant drug interactions. So some of the commonly used drugs, antihypertensives like amlodipine, statins, steroids, which are metabolized through the CYP3A pathway, their concentration can be altered during concurrent use with Paxlovid, and which can give rise to various side effects. So their interaction is something which have to be kept in mind. Again, lack of data precludes its use in pregnancy and breastfeeding. So the benefit in favor of Paxlovid comes from the EPIC-HR trial, which showed an almost 90% relative risk reduction in favor of Paxlovid. And similar outcome was seen in those was started within 3 days or 5 days of symptom onset. But we have to keep in mind that we are still awaiting its release in India. And as and when we get to use it, we have to keep in mind potential adverse effects as well as the interaction potential of Paxlovid. Coming to the monoclonal antibodies, now this is again something which has been much discussed. They typically target the spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. They kind of act as an antiviral. The available options include these two combinations, casirivimab, imdevimab, bamlanivimab, and itesivimab, as also the sotrovimab. Now, the issues in general with any monoclonal antibody is their limited availability, cost, the fact that they require parenteral administration, and they have to be given early on in the course of illness. Also, there is a chance of potential resistance of the different SARS-CoV-2 variants to the monoclonal antibodies. In fact, the current variant, Omicron, for this Omicron, the two combinations, casirivimab and bamlanivimab, these combinations are likely to be inactive. So only sotrovimab, which is not available in India, they're likely to be active. So I would like to emphasize that monoclonal antibody, again, they are good modalities of therapy, but again, they have to be taken in the right context. Just because any monoclonal antibody is available, it does not mean that it translates to clinical benefit to our patients. Talking about the different monoclonal antibodies in a little bit more detail. So this Regin-CoV-2 cocktail is available in India, costs around 60,000 rupees for one dose. Indications is mild COVID-19 who are at high risk for progression to severe COVID. The dosing is again single dose, IV is preferred. Alternatively, subcutaneous dose may be used. And they are to be started as early as possible, but typically within 10 days of symptom onset. Good thing is that hepatic or renal impairment, the assays do not require modification. And there are minor side effects like local reaction, nausea, vomiting, though severe hypersensitivity remains a possibility. So this is actually the trial which went in favor of Regin-CoV-2, and they had actually delineated the high risk of the factors predicting high risk of progression, which are very intuitive: obesity, pregnancy, CKD, CLD, diabetes, and so on. Coming to the monoclonal antibody, the no monoclonal antibody, that's the sotrovimab. So almost a similar kind of indication. The dosing is again single shot within 10 days of symptom onset. No modification in hepatic or renal impairment. Adverse effect profile and the contraindication profile are also similar to the Regin-CoV-2. Briefly, word about convalescent plasma. There was a lot of initial enthusiasm around its use when COVID-19 started. However, different trials have returned different results. Now it has been more or less agreed that we can conclude that convalescent plasma probably does not give unequivocal benefit. So there is some doubt regarding its benefit, and its use again has fallen out of favor in most of the guidelines for the world. Our own trial, the PLUSIT trial, which was a multi-centric trial from India, in fact showed no benefit for patient receiving convalescent plasma vis-a-vis usual care. So what are the factors that some trials they're returning good results, and while the other trials they are not? So it appears that early administration, good titer, doubtful action against against variants, they are some of the factors which leads to variable results as far as the efficacy of convalescent plasma is concerned. So as of now, it mainly remains as an investigational therapy. So a slide where antivirals are compared. So I won't go into each of the rows, but the most important the features I would like to highlight. So for indication, if you're comparing Paxlovid, Molnupiravir, Remdesivir, and Sotrovimab, so all of them are indicated for mild, moderate disease. For moderate, again, as per the CDC classification. So for us, it is mild disease with risk factors for progression. Remdesivir is the only drug which is to be used in hospitalized patients with moderate severe disease. Regarding dose adjustment, renal impairment or hepatic impairment, so for Paxlovid and Molnupiravir, Molnupiravir and Sotrovimab, no dose modification is required. For Paxlovid and Remdesivir, some dose modification may be required in the face of renal impairment or hepatic impairment. And as far as cost is concerned, Sotrovimab, which is not available in India, is the costliest, while the other drugs, they are relatively cheaper. The most important factor is the fact that it has to be given in a hospitalized and should not be given on an outpatient setting. A few words about some other agents which have been used, mainly in mild patients with risk factors for progression, so out of which 2 agents are important, and I'm going to talk about them. The first is the inhaled steroids. So out of which inhaled budesonide has been evaluated. So in treatment of mild early COVID-19, some benefit has been seen in patients having high risk factors for progression. So there have been 2 important trials, the STOIC trial and the Principal trial, which have used inhaled budesonide at dose of 800 milligram BD for around 10 to 14 days. And if we compare the difference between the 2 trials, so STOIC trial was the earlier trial, the non-placebo controlled, smaller sample size, and it used the outcome of reduced urgent medical evaluation or hospitalization as its primary outcome. For Principal, again, it was an open label trial, more number of patients. Here, the primary outcome was somewhat different, reduced time to self-reported recovery, but not hospitalization. Now, this particular outcome, it seemed to be a soft outcome, reduced time to self-reported recovery. So, both the trials showed benefit in favor of inhaled budesonide. But however, given the fact that there were some issues with the design of this trial, open label and non-placebo controlled, and the fact that outcome was soft, it seems that additional randomized controlled trials are required before we can deliver a final verdict on the use of inhaled corticosteroids. But it is agreed on inhaled steroids, inhaled budesonide, as such, they may be innocuous and they may be potentially helpful in patients having mild COVID-19, especially those with having high risk factors for progression. Regarding the other agent, fluvoxamine, now this has again received a lot of hype. So there were a couple of trials, randomized controlled trials talking about it, out of which the most important one was the Together trial. Now I'm going to talk about it. So fluvoxamine, we know that it's an antidepressant thought to act in COVID-19 by the agency of anti-inflammatory and antiviral activities, given in variable dose, typically 100 milligram BD for 10 days. And the trial, which was a Brazilian multicentric trial, it showed very good benefit in favor of fluvoxamine. But if we just look at the fine print of this trial, we see that the primary outcome was a composite endpoint of hospitalization or observation in emergency for 6 hours, which was better as far as the fluvoxamine arm is concerned. And in fact, the death in the per protocol analysis also seemed to go in favor of fluvoxamine. But once we look at the finer print, what we see that all-cause hospitalization was not different. One of the components of the primary outcome, which was the emergency setting visit for at least 6 hours, this was actually more significant. So this actually drove the benefit in the primary outcome seen in favor of fluvoxamine. The death per protocol, even though significant, involved only 1 plus 12, that is 13 patients. So a very small number of patients. So it was thought that this death, which was not a primary outcome, it should not be equated to unequivocal benefit in favor of fluvoxamine. So again, the verdict has been that we need more trials to reiterate the findings observed in this Together trial before it can be used in our patients. As far as supplements are concerned, vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, again thought to be innocuous, but no trial till date have returned unequivocal benefit in its favor. So again, their use is not to be recommended. So this is more or less the the drugs which I wanted to discuss about. So I would like to just put them into perspective and discuss them in form of what works and what does not. So if you look at the patients, they are generally going to be of the two groups: mild with risk factors and hospitalized. Mild without risk factors, there's something which can be absolutely managed without with symptomatic management, and I'm going to not talk about that. So these two groups, if you look at it, so this is these are the treatment modalities which are available in our armamentarium. So remdesivir, both the arms, sotrovimab, Paxlovid, budesonide, molnupiravir, fluoxamine, and the bottom tier of favipiravir, ivermectin, and HCQS. Now, the bottom tier, again, no evidence favor their use, so they can be kind of struck off. For remdesivir, hospitalized patients, I think enough data is there to support its use in moderate or severe hospitalized patients. For mild patients with risk factors, remdesivir may be, may be beneficial, but the issues are the fact that how to give remdesivir in patients who are not hospitalized. That's a major issue, and the fact that there's only a single trial which is reporting its efficacy. So we ideally need more trials before we can recommend the use of remdesivir in the category or in the bracket of mild COVID-19 with risk factors. Regarding budesonide, again, doubtful efficacy, but it may be beneficial. Sotrovimab, Paxlovid, we are still awaiting the release, so not available in India. So as of now, we don't have to kind of worry about them, but it's good to know about their features so that when they are available, we can consider their use only under appropriate indications. For molnupiravir, due to its mutagenic potential and the fact that it causes a relative reduction of 30%, which is pretty less, so their use should not be encouraged. Regarding fluoxamine, again, after the together trial, we need more trials which could replicate the benefit seen. So again, this should not be kind of advocated. So that is more or less what I have to say about the different drugs and how they are supposed to be used. So I have a few questions regarding, these are actually the FAQs which we face on our clinical practice on a day-to-day basis, and I thought I would discuss them. Probably they would serve as good starting points for the subsequent discussion. So 65-year-old diabetic COVID-19 patient having fever for 2 days, RT-PCR positive. Now he insists on taking remdesivir at home. So you as a doctor, would you advise it? So as said before, that no, it should not be, because remdesivir have got potential side effects in the form of hypersensitivity. In fact, the last MOHFW guidelines, they talk about the use of remdesivir only in the setting of moderate to severe disease, where no significant renal or hepatic dysfunction is there, and they are not to be used in patients who are not on oxygen support or in home setting. So this still holds true. A patient who was admitted on day 13 with diagnosis of severe COVID-19 is remdesivir indicated. So again, remdesivir acts in the early part of the COVID-19 illness. So beyond 10 days, their use is probably not beneficial. So the beyond 10 days is the phase of hyperinflammation, where anti-inflammatory like steroids, etc., would probably be more beneficial. So their use should not be recommended in patients beyond 10 days. A patient of moderate COVID-19 is off oxygen and is going to be discharged. But the only constraint is that he has received 4 days of remdesivir. So can he be discharged before he receives the 5th dose? Yes. So the norm is that we give remdesivir till 5 days of discharge. Once the patient has recovered and is fit for discharge, otherwise we should not hold the patient back in the hospital for giving the last dose of remdesivir. A COVID-19 patient is discharged after 7 days of hospital stay, where he had also already received the full course of remdesivir. Now he complains of having shortness of breath and hypoxemia on exerting. So he insists that whether antiviral for a prolonged duration would be helpful. So in this case, again, it is not indicated. Remdesivir is to be given for 5 days after COVID. There are various forms of COVID-19 sequelae which can give rise to shortness of breath with hypoxemia and exertion. So the diagnostic and the treatment line should focus on trying to delineate what the patient has and mete out appropriate treatment. So in this case, remdesivir is not indicated. A patient of COVID-19 is on ventilator, severe COVID-19, so that he is critically ill. Again, his family members, they've heard about remdesivir, they want to try it out as a last measure, should it be given. So again, in these patients, it has been shown, various trials, that there is minimal role, if any. So again, their use in patients who are critically ill should be discouraged. Now, a 55-year-old male patient with a known history of coronary artery disease has been detected COVID-19 positive in the current wave, and his physician is considering the use of the Regin-CoV-2 cocktail. So will it help? So as said, the current Omicron variant is not susceptible to the Regin-CoV-2, so it is going to be, it's not going to be helpful. So its use should not be recommended. In the previous question, that is in the question number 6, this particular patient, what other modalities of therapy may be prescribed? So here again, inhaled budesonide, 800 milligram BD for 5 days. Beyond 5 days of symptom may be prescribed to the patient, and they might be of some benefit to the patient. So this is what the last MOHFW guidelines prescribed. That is, those are 800 BD for 5 days. Beyond 5 days of disease onset. So this still holds true, and this is one option which is still there in our armamentarium. So this is more or less what I have to say. I would like to summarize by saying that there have been notable additions to our arsenal against COVID-19. Some are good and some are apparently not that good. Some therapies which have been used previously, like ivermectin, etc., they are no longer deemed beneficial. So we should not make it our pen habit and continue writing it. We should respect the evidence which is there on our table now and stop using these modalities which are not helpful. Remdesivir is time tested, but again, appropriate indications should not be given to all patients or mild patient risk factors or all severe patients who are critically ill. Appropriate indications have to be adhered to. And finally, in the present day, which is typically returning mild cases, symptomatic management and appropriate monitoring, they're very crucial. And I think we should be adhering to these basics. So that is all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Animesh. You've given a very to clear your doubts, because the new wave is causing huge number of cases, but it's presenting in a different manner. So to understand the strategy that we need to evolve now as compared to what we're doing in the past is very, very important. And the first important thing to remember is do no harm. And it's very important because this wave is different from previous Delta wave. We are seeing a large number of patients who have very mild disease, and treating them aggressively with steroids and other drugs, we will do more harm than good. So I would really emphasize the point that since majority of the patients, the vast majority, more than what we've ever seen before, are having a very mild upper respiratory illness, treatment is mainly symptomatic or only symptomatic. So the treatment that we were giving in the past in the form of various drugs, antiviral, steroids, anticoagulants, have very little role in as of now in the current wave. It may evolve over a period of time, but whatever we've seen right now, very few patients are requiring to be put on steroids, anticoagulants, requiring drugs like remdesivir or tocilizumab. Bulk of patients require just symptomatic